Southern California in cinematic bop or LARP. So when I'm thinking about LARPing, I'm obviously in that ideology, in that framework, and the past research that I've done has looked at that specific context, so it is affecting my thinking. I'd love to hear how I'm wrong in our questions and how I'm missing something there. So today I'll be talking about what factors of group life. Can we get rid of the...
I can't do that and film, if somebody else would like to.
I'll just barrel on. What factors of group life predict dissatisfaction in LARP? So I had a chapter that I worked on in the Weird Con companion book in 2013 that was mostly theoretical, applying dynamics, small group dynamics by Tuckman and others to look at the life cycle of LARP groups. And the excellent benevolent reviewers suggested that I think a little bit more about how my theoretical contribution might be applied to thinking about how game designers and game players can address issues and challenges within LARP, and also inspired by Sarah Bowman's work on conflict in LARP, I took these questions to heart. This is going forward without my consent. All right, so this is rooted in social and industrial organizational psychology. I'm a social psychologist by training, like I said, and I study intergroup conflict and group dynamics and social norms in my primary research, so these also influence my questions. A premise of this is that group development can be considered to occur in stages. So imagine, if you will, a therapy group. I am not a therapist, but imagine a therapy group that forms first initially and must decide whether, the members must decide, do we trust the leader of this group? Do we trust perhaps the therapist? Do we trust the group members and the dynamics here? Am I going to engage with this community? Moving forward from that, there's a stage called storming, which is very tumultuous, or can be, where members are testing, sorry, I get a lot of popping off this mic, I apologize. They're testing the boundaries of the group itself and trying to decide where they are in position of the group, how they can maybe change the values of the group to fit their expectations and needs. One of the major areas in which Tuckman and others have looked at group development is in therapy groups, but I think that a lot of we've gone through this tumultuous phase, and we're going to build cohesion and come together so that we can then do the work of the group. What I would say is that LARPing in many groups, but specifically LARPing, kind of radicalizes this frame, right? It's not this linear progression. There's often going to be recurrences from one phase to another. You're going to go backwards in the cycle, especially in the groups that I've thought about with regard to groups that have things like retirement caps. Right? So within the community, you have members who are vanishing, but reappearing as somebody else. And so this is going to shake up the social and emotional dynamics of the game recurringly, always already. It's going to be changing and not static. So that's going to change this dynamic model. So that's where I'm coming from with looking at these questions. So I think that LARP follows a punctuated equilibrium, especially the more of these kinds of disruptive elements that are in play, like retirement caps. And again, I'd love to hear your different thoughts about that, especially longer LARPs. Obviously, one that meets for an hour, like the one I participated in last night, you kind of go through this a little bit more quickly. So what I did to move forward from this theoretical work was I tested some a priori hypotheses that came out of that chapter with regard to what elements of groups, LARP groups, and their LARPers can lead to dissatisfaction and community breakdown. And I used the LARP census to test this. So the LARP census, which was run by Aaron Vanek and Ryan Patty, had many different participants responding from all over the world, so it was a very exciting but also a very challenging data set. I'm a quant person. Of course, we saved the heavily quantitative talk for last in the afternoon after your coffee was worn off, so you're welcome. I did not participate in the creation of the questions or the collecting of the data, but I was very fortunate to receive a copy of the data that I could use to analyze my research questions. So I do know, and I will report to you a little bit about this, but I'd be happy to take questions. There are others in the room who have analyzed the data also who can provide probably better answers than I can. So this was a 3-month data collection period, starting in 2014, ending early in 2015. It was an international sample with, I think it was more than 60 countries represented, but at varying levels. I also have a chart at the end if you're interested in who participated. Most had 5+ years of experience, although there were some who had fewer, and many who had over 20 years of experience LARPing, so a huge range, and a range in age as well. However, as a researcher who's beholden to a review committee, I only analyzed the data of those who reported that they were 18 years or over. There's some issues with binning where people were answered a question and they were put whether they were 17 to 19 or 16 to 19, so I had to drop everybody who was in that category. I also dropped anybody who didn't answer my key criterion variable, which was how satisfied they were with the Larp groups they participated in the last 12 months. So that reduced my data sample down to a paltry 17,000 plus participants that I managed to get my old laptop to chug through. So I'm going to be looking at just 3 factors, and I'm going to be upfront with you that these 3 factors were picked on some subjective criteria and some objective criteria. So the 3 factors that can undermine satisfaction that I looked at in this particular study, or data analysis, was Larp group embeddedness, zero-sum competition, and principled conflicts. And these 3 were picked because I could kind of get at them with the questions that already existed in the Larp census questionnaire. They were predicted from my theoretical research on group dynamics in Larp. And they were things that anecdotally many people had come up to me, or we had discussions of. These are things that I think drive people batty in Larp. Right? So they're things that I think are relevant to game designers and gamers, but also there are things I can test with this model. So Larp group embeddedness is densely networked groups. The idea here being that the more Larps are involved in, it could potentially lead to strain on the players and the player base. Zero-sum competition, this idea that when you're in a context in which wins and losses tend to be unshared, when winner takes all, this can lead to out-of-character conflict that can create unstable, unfriendly social networks. Also, principled conflicts, this idea that disagreement on the group's shared values, beliefs, and ideas can drive people away from the community and create conflicts that seem unsolvable. Okay? So these are the 3 that I looked at. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the data, and you can't get mad at me because it's the data and I didn't do it. It's what people said. So here we go. So first, I looked at the question that whether densely packed Larp networks string player loyalties as one premise for why Larp group embeddedness could be negatively associated with player satisfaction. So again, the criterion here is how satisfied are you with the Larp groups you played in for the last 12 months? And so I'm looking here to see if there's a relationship here. I did a hierarchical linear regression, controlling for age and gender, for those of you who are focused. And I found very mixed results, so very tentative, very cautionary. And I'm going to talk about this. What's the point of reporting mixed results? I'll talk about this in the implications. But here we see that diversity of play with regard to combat styles, so what mechanics are involved, was negatively related to player satisfaction. So the more types of games you're involved in, whether you're doing stuff that has rules where you fight with a weapon, rules where you fight with rolling the dice or picking out player cards, having a diversity of that style was negatively related to satisfaction for less satisfied. Whereas these other things like diversity of play with regard to theme or even historic or even fantasy or even sci-fi, that had no relationship with satisfaction. And on the contrary, and this one I kind of could have figured out, but I wanted to look at many different ways to look at social embeddedness. Number of LARPs played in the last 12 months was slightly positive. That makes sense. The more you like to LARP, guess what? The more you LARP. So I would say cautionary interpretation here, we'll talk a little bit more. But yeah, okay. And also in general with a lot of these analyses, when you're having a 17,000 plus participation pool, you're going to get significant effects even with a small amount of the variation being explained by this factor. So it's not saying that diversity of play is making people run away from LARPing screaming, but it has a small but significant effect on their LARP satisfaction. Okay. Next, we have zero-sum competition. This is the idea that competition can drive conflict, or competitive types may gravitate towards competitive style play, and therefore that would generate or contribute to conflict. So I'm being ambivalent on the direction of causality here. Did the player create the game or does the game create the player? And this could occur via bleed, which can cause conflict to transgress the in-character, out-of-character boundaries and how you fight with your friends all the time. So here I found actually a positive relationship. So the more that people said that they liked conflict, but we're going to look at how did we define conflict here, the more they were satisfied with the Larp groups they played in the last 12 months. However, remember that I'm kind of shoehorning questions that pre-existed into my analyses, and here we have the question that I had to work with was, I prefer LARPs that involve intrigue, scheming, or political play, so hold on to that for a second. That was positively associated with enjoying LARP, or being satisfied with your LARP groups. And again, the interpretation is caution here, small effect sizes, significant effects. Also, here we go. The question is not necessarily zero-sum competition. It's not I win, you lose, haha, I take your things, right? I drink your milkshake. It's actually just intrigue, which could be for the greater good, for example. Defining full conflicts, my favorite, and here's where I compare American LARPs to Nordic LARPs, and everybody gets hot under the collar. So what I did as a researcher is I took at face value the concept that Americans LARP different, and Canadians, North Americans LARP differently from Nordic LARPers, or from other LARPers throughout the world, and now we had a great example of how Russian LARPers may be more common with Americans, so maybe I need to redo my analysis here. But what I did was, I took that at face value as a hypothesis that I don't necessarily agree with or not, and I asked whether preference for role play would increase satisfaction for people who were playing in areas where role play is valued, non-America, not Canada. And preference for individual achievement would increase satisfaction if you're playing in America and Canada over other countries. Does that make sense? So the idea here is that you have a match between the player and the location, you'll be more satisfied. So what I didn't find that preference for role play increased satisfaction for everybody. Actually, no, I did find preference for role-play increased satisfaction for everybody. So the more you like to role-play, the more you like to be immersed into your characters, the more you like to LARP. The more you're satisfied with your LARP groups. Okay, great, we're all on the same page. But what I found was, so the X here is that it doesn't necessarily support the hypothesis, is why I have X there. I did find is that the effect of preference, okay, checking one time. The effect of preference for individual achievement depended on region. So, whether you like to role play and you're living in America, Canada, Russia, Sweden, it doesn't matter. You just like to role play, you like to learn. But if you are high in preference for individual achievement and you are living in the US or Canada, you are more satisfied with your LARP groups than other countries. So, does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, so if you are a person who is high on the question of do you prefer to win in LARPs, have people look at your LARP character, be a leader, then you are more likely to be satisfied with the LARP groups that you participated in the last 12 months if you lived in Canada or America than if you live in others.
So you're saying basically if you are in a culture that values individual achievement and you're playing a LARP that emphasizes individual achievement, you're more likely to be satisfied.
Yes, statistically significantly, although small effect size, yes. Break this down by country. But the more in general people like to role play, the more they like to have this individual achievement. I like to be a leader, I like to do things that affect the world. Okay. Also, if you include elements like, I want my character to gain skills and abilities through time, that is not associated with individual achievement. It was this kind of special, I want my character to be autonomously achieving that had this effect. Okay. All right, so I hope to get a lot of questions about that. But to conclude, what aspects of LARPs and LARPers lead to dissatisfaction with the group? I would say that hypothesis 3 had the strongest support, so having conflicts, having this idea that what you're looking for isn't necessarily available where you are, was the most supported. But what can we take away from this data in general, given that there were a lot of null findings, is that what we can do going forward is to think about questions like, what makes people excited to game? What makes people satisfied with their games? And we can use quantitative methods to try to answer those questions, rather than anecdotally just figuring it out ourselves. And I think that that's one of the strongest things I'd like to say about these data. Of course, limitations, shoehorning, jury-rigging questions adapted to the research from an already existing survey, some questions of fidelity with regard to the hypothesis and the questions that were used in data analysis, as well as the fact that large sample may exaggerate small effects, and I'd love to do an experimental study to validate these results. I don't know how that would be done. Also, so just in the future, key aspects of group life can reveal challenges in LARP groups, And future work should replicate and extend with a new survey. Maybe another LARP census in the future, where I can get some questions in there. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.